You are Neil Armstrong. The year is 1969. You are 600 feet above the surface of the moon, and the computer is flying you straight into a crater surrounded by boulders the size of automobiles. You have about 2 minutes of fuel left, maybe less. The gauge is not giving you a number you can trust. Behind you is a $25 billion national effort and the promise of a dead president. Below you is a place no human has ever touched. You need to find somewhere safe to put this machine down before the fuel runs out. 3 options exist. None of them are safe. Let us back up. 5 months from now, the 1960s end. President Kennedy committed the country to landing a man on the moon before the decade was out. That was 1961. He did not live to see it attempted. The program that carries his promise has cost roughly $25 billion, which in today's money is about $200 billion. It has also cost lives. In January 1967, astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee burned to death inside the Apollo 1 capsule during a launch pad test. The cabin was filled with pure oxygen. The hatch would not open. They never had a chance. The fire shut the program down for 20 months. It recovered. It reached this moment. But the danger did not go away. During the 1960s, active astronauts were 8 times more likely to die than men of the same age in the general population. You know this. On the eve of this flight, you estimated a 90% chance of getting back to Earth alive and a 50-50 chance of actually landing. Those are your own numbers, not pessimism, just the math of how many things you cannot predict between lunar orbit and the surface. 3 days ago, the Soviet Union launched Luna 15, an unmanned probe aimed at the moon. The timing was not a coincidence. If your landing fails, the Soviets still get a piece of the story. Back in Washington, a speechwriter named William Sawfire has already drafted a statement for President Nixon titled, "In Event of Moon Disaster." It is sitting in a file right now, ready to be read on television if you and Buzz Aldrin die up here. Here is what is strange about this moment. You are not military, you are a civilian. Your salary is modest. There's no guaranteed fortune waiting for you if you survive. The risk you are taking is not career-ending. It is life-ending. And yet here you are, and the reason you are here is that you have been preparing for exactly this kind of situation for your entire adult life without knowing it. You flew 78 combat missions in Korea. You have piloted over 200 types of aircraft, including the X-15 rocket plane, at 5 times the speed of sound. On your 4th X-15 flight, you bounced off the upper atmosphere at Mach 3 and overshot Edwards Air Force Base by 45 miles. You were too high, too fast, and running out of energy. You glided the aircraft back and landed it. There was no second attempt available. 3 years before this moment, you were aboard Gemini 8 when a stuck thruster sent your spacecraft into an uncontrolled spin. You and Dave Scott were rotating at nearly 1 revolution per second, approaching the threshold where you would black out. You were out of radio contact with the ground. No one could tell you what to do. You made the call to shut down the entire primary thruster system and activate the re-entry thrusters, which were reserved for one use only. It stopped the spin. It also killed the mission, cutting a 3-day flight down to 10 hours. But you walked away from it. 14 months before today, you were 200 feet off the ground in the Lunar Landing Research Vehicle, a contraption built to simulate how the lunar module handles in low gravity. A helium pressure failure killed the Attitude thrusters. The vehicle started to tip. You had maybe 2 seconds to decide whether to fight for it or punch out. You ejected. The machine hit the ground and exploded. You parachuted down, walked to the office, and were back at your desk the same afternoon. That is who you are when the alarms start going off. You and Aldrin are descending toward the Sea of Tranquility. The lunar module Eagle separated from the command module Columbia about an hour ago. Mike Collins is up in Columbia, alone, orbiting overhead. He cannot help you. Aldrin is beside you, reading altitude and descent rate from the instruments. The onboard computer is flying the approach. It has 74 kilobytes of memory and runs at a speed that a modern calculator would beat. At about 30,000 feet, the computer flashes an alarm. 1202. You do not recognize the code. Aldrin does not recognize it either. Neither of you has ever seen this alarm in simulation. Your hand moves toward the abort handle. If this alarm means what it might mean, the computer is failing and you need to get out of here. But 240,000 miles away in a back room at Mission Control in Houston, a 26-year-old engineer named Jack Garman is the only person who knows what 1202 means. The computer is overloaded. A phasing mismatch between the rendezvous radar and the landing computer is feeding it useless data, chewing up processing cycles. But Margaret Hamilton's software team at MIT built the computer to handle this. It has a priority system. When it gets overloaded, it drops whatever is least important and keeps running the things that will keep you alive. The computer is not failing, it is shedding weight. Garmin tells Guidance Officer Steve Bales the alarm is safe. Bales tells Flight Director Gene Kranz. Kranz tells Capcom Charlie Duke. Duke tells you, "Go on that alarm." The alarm fires again. A different code, 1201. Same problem. Each time, Mission Control says, "Go." You keep descending. But the alarms are not your real problem. You're looking through two small triangular windows. A grid etched on the glass shows you where the computer is aiming. And what you see through that grid is a disaster. The automated guidance is taking you directly toward West Crater, a hole about 300 feet across, ringed by a field of boulders. The rocks are enormous. You will later describe them as the size of automobiles, sitting on slopes too steep for any kind of safe touchdown. If you land there, a boulder could collapse a landing leg. The lunar module could tip over. Fuel lines could rupture. The ascent engine, your only ride home, could be damaged. You and Aldrin would die on the surface of the moon and nobody could come get you. So here are your options. Option 1. Let the computer land you where it wants to go. This is not really a choice. You can see the terrain. Landing in that boulder field is a death sentence. Option 2. Abort. Hit the abort button and the descent engine shuts down. Explosive bolts fire. The ascent stage separates, the ascent engine lights. You fly back up to orbit, dock with Collins, go home. The mission is over, but you are alive. Apollo 12 can try again in 4 months. Aborting within protocol is the trained response. It is what the rulebook says to do. It is what most pilots would do. But here's something about aborting that the rulebook does not emphasize. If you abort from below 100 feet, the descent stage drops to the moon beneath you and hits the surface hard. Its fuel tanks could rupture. The propellant is hypergolic, which means the two chemicals explode on contact with each other. Debris flies upward at thousands of feet per second toward the ascending module you are sitting in. ASI? Low-altitude abort might kill you just as dead as a bad landing. Option 3. You switch the computer to P66, a semi-automatic mode. The computer keeps managing your rate of descent, but you take control of where the spacecraft goes. You fly the lunar module sideways like a helicopter, scanning the surface for a flat spot. But every second you spend flying sideways burns fuel you need for the final drop. You are spending the last of your margin on a search that might not find anything in time. And here is the detail that makes this worse. The fuel quantity gauge is lying to you. The propellant is sloshing around inside the tanks, tripping the low-level sensor early. You might have more fuel than the instruments say. You might not. You have absolutely no way to know which one it is. This is the decision, not a single clean choice between two options, but a continuous stream of judgment calls compressed into minutes, with a fuel gauge you cannot trust, a landscape you have never seen, and a spacecraft you have never landed. No one on Earth can help you. The radio signal takes 1.28 seconds each way. By the time Mission Control hears your problem, thinks about it, and sends a response, the situation has already moved. What would you do? Think about it seriously. You are 600 feet above the moon. The computer is aimed at a boulder field. The abort handle is right there. You can end this right now, go home alive, and let someone else try in 4 months. Nobody would blame you. It is the correct decision by every written protocol. Or you can fly it yourself on a fuel supply that might be a lie, over terrain you are seeing for the first time, in a vehicle that handles like nothing you have ever flown before. Abort or fly? Armstrong flew. At 600 feet, he clicked over to P-66. He took the hand controller. The computer kept managing the descent rate, but now he was steering. He pitched the lunar module forward and flew it over the boulder field, this strange gold and silver spider drifting sideways above the surface of the moon. At 400 feet, he spotted a possible landing area. He flew toward it. There was a crater in it. He kept going. At 250 feet, the fuel quantity light came on. In mission control, they started counting. He found a patch of ground that looked relatively clear at about 100 feet. He started the final descent, but now the exhaust from the descent engine was kicking up lunar dust, a rolling cloud of fine gray powder spreading across the surface below. Him! He could barely see the ground. He fixed his eyes on a few large rocks poking up through the dust and used them to judge whether he was still drifting sideways. If he was drifting when the landing gear touched, the legs could buckle. Then Charlie Duke's voice from Houston. 60 seconds. 60 seconds of fuel. Maybe. At the current throttle. 60 seconds until he either lands or aborts. The abort option is still technically open, but from this altitude, with the descent stage falling to the surface beneath him, the explosion risk makes it nearly as dangerous as a bad touchdown. He kept ascending. Aldrin was reading the numbers. Altitude, descent rate, forward velocity. He was still drifting slightly. 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Nobody in that room in Houston was breathing. Gene Kranz had told his controllers before the descent began, "Whatever happens here today, I will stand beside every decision you make." That promise was being tested now. Armstrong did not abort. He was committed. And then Aldrin's voice. Contact light. A probe hanging beneath one of the landing legs had brushed the surface of the moon. Armstrong shut down the descent engine. Eagle dropped the last few feet and settled with a bump. It was 2017 UTC, July 20th, 1969. Charlie Duke could barely get the words out. Roger, Twan? Tranquility, we copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot. Post-mission analysis found Eagle had landed with about 216 pounds of usable fuel. By the real-time numbers available during the landing, that was roughly 25 seconds of flight time. Later analysis put it closer to 45 or 50 seconds. But Armstrong did not have the later analysis. He had a gauge he could not trust and a voice in his ear counting down. His heart rate hit 150 beats per minute during the final approach. Some analyses suggest it may have briefly spiked above 200 at touchdown. His resting heart rate was about 75. His body registered what his voice never did. If you listen to the recordings, he sounds like he is reading a checklist. If he had aborted, the crew comes home safe. Pete Conrad and Apollo 12 attempt the landing 4 months later. The program continues. But the first attempt to land on the moon goes into the history books as a failure, even a careful and defensible one. Every mission after that carries the weight of a false start. If he had let the computer put him down in the boulder field, the odds are bad. A collapsed leg, a ruptured fuel line, a tilted spacecraft that can never launch again. Nixon reads Safire's disaster statement on national television. It begins, "Fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace." Neither of those things happened. Armstrong landed. He spent 21 hours on the surface. He walked on the moon for 2.5 hours. He and Aldrin collected 47 pounds of lunar rock. They returned to Earth on July 24th, with 5 months to spare on Kennedy's deadline. NASA fixed the fuel sloshing problem before the next mission. They added baffles to the tanks. The computer alarm issue led to changes in how software was designed for decades afterward. 5 more crews landed on the moon after Apollo 11. But the number that stays with you is this. After the mission, NASA asked Armstrong how much of the landing he flew on manual control. He said about 90 seconds. 90 seconds of hand flying in a machine he had never landed anywhere, over a world no one had ever touched, on a fuel gauge he could not believe. He found a clear patch of dust and rocks, put the thing down, and killed the engine. Then he told Houston the Eagle had landed, in a voice so flat you would think he had just pulled into a parking space.